So, Brian, keeping with the theme of UFC 249, I know there's something that you wanted to talk about regarding Dana White.
Yes.
And regarding the one fighter on the card who tested positive for COVID-19.
Right. So one of the biggest things, I guess, we talked a lot about the event itself from a fight perspective, but UFC 249 was important to sports in the world and sports in America because it was the first major sporting event since the pandemic hit. So one of the major questions I think that comes out of this is that I think a lot of people are going to be asking, I think other sports organizations are going to be asking, is was this a success or not? And I think it just really, I honestly think it's really too early to answer that question, because Dana White went against the grain. He said, hey, I'm gonna dig my heels in. I'm gonna die on this hill. We're gonna bring this back. Not only are we bringing it back and for this fight, we're gonna talk about the next card that's coming up on Wednesday. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this, and he stuck with it. Now, there was a bit of a curveball or a monkey wrench thrown in the plans when Jacare Souza and two cornermen both tested positive for COVID-19. His fight with Uriah Hall was removed from the card, and him and his cornerman were then removed from the hotel and taken into, so they could get medical treatment. But Jacare was asymptomatic. I don't know if his cornermen were, but Jacare was fine. He made weight fine. He looked like the normal beast that he always looks like. So it was, he was fine. So the reason why I say it's too early really to answer this question is because we have to find out if there are going to be more positive tests from the people who were there and other people moving forward. Because if over the next week or two, there's like 2 and 3 and 4 more people from this card or who were there who were infected by Jacare or those two cornermen, then I think the answer now becomes that it was a failure, because this was a risk that was taken. And there may not have been as much social distancing there as there should have been. I mean, even if you just look at some of the weigh-ins, I mean, Dana White didn't have on gloves. He didn't have on anything. He was fist bumping people. He fist bumped Jacare, who Jacare had on gloves, but so you just, and this is just what the cameras caught. So you don't know what all happened outside of that. Right. So I really don't think you can answer that question until we know how far or if anyone else is infected. If somebody else gets infected, it's a failure. If it's only Jacare and his two cornermen, then that means that their quarantine practices somewhat worked, even though I will say this, Jacare informed the UFC when he arrived to the hotel, and this is per a statement provided to me by the UFC. He informed the UFC when he got to the hotel that he may have been in contact with he was in contact with someone in his family who had tested positive for coronavirus. At that point, the UFC should have immediately sent him away, sent him to the hospital, sent him into quarantine along with everybody in his camp, and never allowed him to check into the hotel. You should not have taken the risk of having him there at all after he had divulged that information. And I think and you should have just basically sacrificed that fight on the card immediately. Jacare did not want to do that. And this is what he said, because he really needed this fight from a financial standpoint, which I think relies a whole nother problem with the UFC, this entire subject on its own. But yes, so like I said, essentially it's too early to tell for sure if this is a success or not.
Well, I mean, I think it was a success. And I think it was a success because I do think that the intentions were good to get things somewhat back to normal. I think that the idea of the testing and having these protocols put in place, usually it's the first guy back that takes all the risk, takes all the criticism, because there's a wait and see approach from everybody else. Hey, let's see where they fail.
Absolutely.
Instead of saying, hey, let's see where they succeeded, it's always, let's see where they fail.
It's my life.
Right. So, so to an extent, I give them a lot of credit. You know why? They put a lot of food on a lot of people's tables Saturday night. Yes, there is risk, but you know what? I go to Costco. I go to Walmart, whatever, to pick up food, to pick up things that are essential. I go to the bank. I'm at risk.
Yeah.
And I'm around far more people that aren't being tested than the people that were a part of the UFC show. So I think what they did was, I think they were successful and a winner. Unfortunately, somebody tested positive, but it just means that the testing worked. Now, we'll know in a couple of weeks if that contact translated into other people getting sick, but we'll find out if my interaction with the teller at Costco yesterday ended up in me getting sick and I was wearing a mask and I was wearing gloves. So there is risk in everything. But I do think that they put on a great show.
Right.
I think they did it under tough circumstances. And I think they learned from it.
Yeah.
I think that you'll see I think you'll see things maybe reportedly smoother for Wednesday's show. And I think as this thing evolves, I think that you'll find that, like anything, there's trial and error. There's going to be somewhat of mistakes being made, and I think they'll correct them. And look, I'm not an MMA UFC guy, the X's and O's of it all, but from an event standpoint, from a promotional standpoint, from getting combat sports moving, getting sports moving, a lot of people benefited. The sports books benefited. The fans had something to watch. The fighters were able to fight. The teams were able to participate. Across the board, it helped get things going in an environment where no one wanted this.
Right.
Someone like Dana White, whether you love him or hate him, agree, disagree with his politics, with his personality, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Doesn't matter. It's his company, his show. Yeah. And you know what? Like I said, a lot of people made money. They did it in what I really believe was as careful as they could have thought about way. Yeah. And if you really looked at the venue from the wide shot, it was really empty and very limited staff. Yeah.
Realistically careful, I say. It's about, because there's only so much care that you can take right now in this kind of a thing with something as easily passed on as this.
And by the way, one more thing. Did they know about what did Souza inform them? Did he not? Did they do the right? This is just reported.
No, no. This was in the statement that was given that UFC sent me directly. Okay. That he did inform them that when he got there that he had been in contact with his family.
And he was tested.
Yes, he was
tested. And the test came back positive.
But the thing of it was my personal thought. This is me giving an opinion based on the fact that they shared. Right. As soon as he said that, to limit as much risk as possible. Yeah. I would have said, okay, bro. And here's what I would have done. I would have paid him his show money. And I would have paid Uriah Hall his show money. And
how do you know they didn't?
I don't know if they did, but what I know that they didn't do is they didn't send him home. And so that's really what my point is. I would have sent him home. Right. But I would have sent him home with his show money.
And remember, we don't know if they didn't.
No, we know that they didn't send him home. That's my point.
I get it. Your point is that go home, here's your money, even if you're negative, you might have been in contact. But here's the thing. But Brian, this is what I'm saying. He was smart enough to say he might have been in contact with someone that was positive.
You know what? It's not even smart. It was humane.
I get it. And I'm saying that. And you know what, Brian? I might have come in contact with 10 people yesterday that were positive at Costco.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying, here's my point. I feel like
he did the right thing.
I feel like he really is really an example of the way people should be.
Yeah, he was responsible.
From a common decency standpoint.
Yes, agreed.
Here's a guy who already said, I need this money, and knew that by him saying this, he could be putting that payday that he said he needed in jeopardy. But he thought enough to be thoughtful enough to say that. So I really think that's something.
I don't think anyone's disputing that, though.
More about people.
Well, write about it. You have two
Yeah.
platforms. Write about that.
I mean,
And write
it
about the
really is
social
an awesome thing.
responsibility.
It really is an awesome thing that he did that, you know.
I mean, we're
But
talking about it.
yeah, I think the UFC would have been best served to send him home, because if they'd have done that, that would have looked a lot better than we're going on with the event, even though we had 3 people here in the hotel who tested positive. So that was
Well, they weren't
as
going
of right
along
now,
with it
that's
until
the
they
only
did test positive. Remember
Hmm?
that. They weren't going, they got the positive test back after the weigh-in.
Right. Well, it was reported after the weigh-in, so we don't know exactly when it got back. But my point is, you went
So
on.
did they both weigh in, Brian?
Yes.
Did they make weight?
Yes.
You know, once they cross that scale,
Supposed to get paid.
get paid.
Yeah.
So I guarantee you, Hall probably went home with his money.
Yes.
And I would say the UFC paid Souza his money.
I would pretty much bet they did. But
And Pride said, "Here's your money. Just don't talk about it."
there's a story out there about that too as well. Stephen Espinoza actually started it, and it seemed to be corroborated by some other folks as well, that the people on the athletes were could be putting their purses in jeopardy if they talk in detail about the COVID testing.
Sure. Right.
But my point of it was that the best way, and obviously this is Monday morning quarterbacking,
Right.
the best way is to have sent him home from the beginning, as soon as he said that he may have been in contact.
Well, I still think that overall they're a winner. You know, I think that they're learning. I think they'll make adjustments. I think they're now ahead of everybody else.
Yes. Well, WWE is actually ahead of everybody else, because they really, Vince McMahon is really the igniter of this concept.
Right.
So.
Right. Bob talked about it in March. Even went to Madison Square Garden and said, "We'll do the Shakur Stevenson fight behind closed doors on March 17th or March 14th." But the Garden wouldn't do it.
Yeah. And that was smart. WWE, I mean, Vince pushed and seemingly got this thing done where they got a new designation for essential workers. And that's what opened this whole thing up. And it was really kicked off by him, and everybody else is piggybacking on it.
So I will say this, something I heard. And when did you hear the first UFC show outside of Florida?
Outside of Florida?
Uh-huh.
There hasn't been a confirmation of a one outside of Florida. We hear about Fight Island and all that, but we haven't heard about anything concrete. Well, you know that he wants to be back at the Apex by the end of this month, but he hasn't gotten clearance.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything else at this point is kind of just talk at this point until it's, you know, confirmed by something. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens.